Hey everyone, as you can see, I'm in a hotel room. It's the day after a game, but it's 1 month away from the NHL trade deadline, and I've been making so many calls to my sources around the league to figure out what's going to go on, and figure it's probably time that I share some of that information with all of you. So we're going to focus today on the Boston Bruins and what I'm hearing about what their plans could be ahead of the March 8th NHL trade deadline. First, let's just take stock of where the Bruins are as an organization. Everyone, and I mean everyone, thought that they were going to take a step back from last season where they set the NHL record for regular season wins. They were fantastic. But gone is Patrice Bergeron, their captain. David Krejci also retired like Bergeron. And then all of a sudden, that depth down the middle doesn't seem as scary. You're also missing that leadership. Lo and behold, though, the Bruins are such a well-built organization, they didn't even miss a beat. And they are as much of a contender right now as anyone is. Now, it is in the Boston Bruins' DNA as an organization to add at this time of year. We have seen them time and time again mortgage their future draft picks, a prospect pool that's pretty depleted, to try to win now by adding veteran players. Last year was a great example. They added Dmitry Orlov, Tyler Bertuzzi, Garnet Hathaway, all varying levels of success. And unfortunately, we all know how it ended. Sadly, they were disappointed, actually shocked in the first round of the playoffs. Right now, they're without a first, a second, and a third round pick for next year's NHL draft. I think that that's much concern to management. They know they need to start building back from within. So they're going to look to add. I just think it's less aggressive as years past. So let's look at what we're dealing with here. The number one issue that they have to figure out is what is going on with Jake DeBrusk. The winger has had his ups and his downs in Boston. At one point, he wanted to leave the organization. That was under a previous coaching staff, though. He seems to have found his fit. He seems to be thriving, mostly with Jim Montgomery, and most importantly, he says he wants to stay. He's on the second year of a 2-year, $8 million contract and becomes a UFA this summer. He wants a new contract, and he says that he believes he should get one, but time is ticking as we get closer to this deadline, and the Bruins have to make a decision. Do you keep him around? Is he part of your future? Or do you try to trade him for other assets? Or do you keep him as your own rental player? That seems to be going a little less in vogue in the NHL. My gut is that a deal does get done, but this is a situation that's going to come to a head over the next few weeks. It's absolutely one to monitor. The Bruins don't have that much cap space to play with at the deadline. That's another thing we got to mention here. Less than $1 million. So if they are going to add, they potentially have to subtract roster players to clear that space. Who are we talking about here? Matt Grzelcyk. There's a big jam on the left side of the defense. This is an area of surplus for them. If they were going to move anyone away, I think it would be Grzelcyk. They've been quietly shopping him for the last few years. He makes under $4 million on the cap, but that's pretty healthy, and that's probably one of the reasons why he hasn't moved. But if someone comes calling, Matt Grzelcyk could get moved off the roster. Another interesting asset that they have is Jacob Lauko. He's a promising forward. He plays with a lot of grit. Jam. You want that come playoff time. And he's really reasonable. He's locked in for the next 2 seasons. Team control under $1 million each. But he would be of interest to a lot of teams, and I could see him being part of a package that gets moved out. The only way the Bruins do this, though, the only way that they're moving 2 players from their active roster is if they're bringing in people with appreciable more value. So we'll see what happens with these 2 players, but those are 2 guys to also keep an eye on. One question that everybody has is what about the goaltending, because there's been such a league-wide thirst this year for goaltending, steady goaltending, and just not enough guys that are reliable to go around. This is an area of excess for the Bruins. They have Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark, who are both fantastic, and I know people wonder, would they consider moving one of them? The one guy that they would move out of those 2, I believe, would be Ullmark. However, in making calls around the league, it just doesn't seem like the Bruins have the appetite to do that during the regular season. They've gone with this tandem. It's really worked. They love relying on both guys. I would be really surprised if they move one. The only way they do it is if someone calls and makes Don Sweeney their GM an offer he absolutely can't refuse. To the point of Swayman, he's due for a new contract this summer. It would be absolutely shocking not to see that get done. I know the arbitration process was pretty frustrating for Swayman last year. It's something that no player should ever have to go through. You're basically there and your boss is telling you all the reasons why you don't deserve to get paid, and then you get paid, and then you have to show up on the roster anyway. It's just brutal. But Jeremy Swayman did it, and he showed up, showed out. He's going to get a new contract. I wouldn't be shocked if that gets done sometime during the season, if not over the summer. Speaking of the summer, the Bruins will have $28 million in cap space to play with. That's fantastic. So that's enough money to pay Swayman, potentially pay DeBrusk if they decide to keep him, and take care of a couple other needs. Okay, all of that is to say, who could they potentially add this year? I mentioned the center depth. That was an area that I know the Bruins were scouting pretty heavily to begin the season. There were a couple big name centers that were available. Unfortunately, the biggest two are already gone. One was Sean Monahan. I don't know how much interest the Bruins had in him, but the other was Elias Lindholm. And I do know that the Bruins definitely scouted Lindholm and were considering adding him to the roster. Only problem, you see, when he got traded to Vancouver, the absolute boatload of a package that went back to Calgary. It was a ton. Kuzmenko, first-round pick, other assets. I don't think the Bruins would have been willing to give up that much. As I mentioned, I think they're a little less aggressive than they have been in years past. So you look at the other centers available, and it's not really anyone that excites you. The Bruins actually have a lot of depth in the center, just not as many game-breaking speed or game-breaking ability. And I'm not sure that there's anyone out there that would truly excite them enough to mortgage, again, future assets. Potentially they add here, but my sense is that the Bruins are now pivoting to look at wingers, an impact winger that they can plug into the middle six that would really help out this team with, again, just that next level. Who are some guys I'm talking about here? Vladimir Tarasenko. He's not happy with the Ottawa Senators. He actually just changed agents again. He's changed agents a couple different times in his career. We see what a lethal threat for so many years. He was one of the most dynamic snipers in this league, just right behind Alex Ovechkin in that category. Super dangerous on the power play. I would be interested to see if the Bruins could find a match with Tarasenko, who went to the Rangers at last year's trade deadline. It was a great fit there, meshed in really well. Another guy that I've heard potentially could be in the mix is Anthony Duclair. He's in San Jose, hasn't had the best year, but we know who Anthony Duclair is, a player with dynamic speed. I would love to see what he looks like in Jim Montgomery's system. Also, maybe David Perron, if he pries away from the Detroit Red Wings. That's an interesting situation because they're trying to get to the playoffs for the first time in many years, but also Stevie Y is always thinking about the big long-term sustainable future plan. So if he becomes available, the Boston Bruins would absolutely be a team he's a perfect fit for. Those leadership intangibles, the way he plays hard. He's also just a dynamic scorer and really consistent. So I would keep an eye on some of these middle six wingers for the Bruins to add. All right, recap here. The Bruins, Stanley Cup contender. We think that they're going to add at the trade deadline. I don't think they're going to be as aggressive as in years past, but they still want to make their team better for that chance to win the Stanley Cup, this fantastic core. Thank you guys for watching. I will continue to update you ahead of the March 8th trade deadline, which we'll be covering all over ESPN and all of our platforms.